Great. Glad to be here. Thank you everyone for being here, and hopefully what I share with you will be useful, particularly for those who are planning to submit designs. But in general, these are tips and tricks that I think will be useful for anyone who has meetings, runs meetings, or participates in meetings. So let me share my screen. I won't share too many slides, but just a few here to kind of show you what I'm talking about. So I pair share. Is it sharing now? Can you see my slides? We good?
Looks awesome.
Okay, good. All right. So top 5 recommendations from science for effective meeting design. So first we need to talk about the science a little bit, right? So a little bit of background on me. This is just from my bio. You can check out my bio on the website. I am a professor. I'm at the University of Utah. I run the Center for Meeting Effectiveness. And as Elise has alluded to, I've written a few books on the topic in recent years. But the science itself is the systematic study of what happens before, during, and after a meeting that can make it better or worse, right? And it's really about this whole broader context of how meetings matter to organizations. And so it's an important area of study, but it's one that isn't its own discipline. It's a multidisciplinary or cross-disciplinary type of endeavor because people from all sorts of different disciplines study this. For example, one of the first scientific studies on this topic was written by Helen Schwartzman in 1986. There's a nice book called The Meeting. It's no offense to Helen, it's not exactly page turner. It's not entertaining from that sense. It's entertaining from a scientific sense, and she's from anthropology. So she comes at it from the perspective of how the meeting is kind of this central nexus for how a group or an organization operates and understands each other, and how they collaborate and how they change over time. A few years later, Steven Rogelberg, who many of you may know, who's written a book on the surprising science of meetings. I'm the Joe Allen he mentions in there, and he did a lot of work on the science of meetings and put that out there as some best practices. And again, that was before the pandemic, though, and so it's kind of okay. Does that still apply now, right? I came on the scene around 2010. As of today, across the disciplines, there's about 253 articles and books on the topic of meetings that are scientific, science-based. Okay, there's lots and lots of others that are still good. They may not be science-based in the sense that they haven't been tested, the ideas through the scientific method. And so many of these books are still very, very good because experience is a very good crucible for learning best practice. But they haven't followed the scientific approach. So these are just the items that are from that space. Okay. So with that, let's talk about these recommendations. First one is establish the purpose, right? One of the things that I found relatively recently with my partner, actually at Logitech now, looking at meeting science, we started to look at calendar data to see, okay, in the calendar, are we establishing the purpose, right? And we found that on average, only about 5% of our calendar invites actually says the agenda or the purpose or the aim or the real key thing we're trying to do in a given meeting. Now, that doesn't mean there's not an agenda. That doesn't mean there's not a purpose. It just means that maybe we're not communicating it as effectively as it could be. So clarifying the purpose in the meeting itself is also still going to be important. Maybe your calendar invite didn't say it, or maybe it did, but people weren't aware of it. Making sure everybody's on the same page and identifying the steps towards accomplishing the goal for which you are gathering, right? And what I tend to do, and this is something I recommend, is once you have told everyone the purpose, through the calendar invite, through the agenda, through all the means possible, when you get into the meeting, ask someone to say, after you've clarified the purpose, what is the purpose based on what I've said here, and get that feedback, occasionally, just to make sure that everybody really actually understands what you mean when you say this is what we're trying to do today. Okay, so that's the first recommendation. Second recommendation is it's really, really important that everybody can be seen and heard. Okay. And the reason that's so important is because the data would suggest that the number one thing for ensuring that a hybrid meeting is effective is making sure that everybody is actually seen, like that you can look them in the eye, so to speak, and that they can be heard. So this is a technological issue, this is a software issue, and this is a in-person issue as well. This is something that has to be accomplished. And so when you're developing your designs, you need to consider all the different locations where people might be connecting from. and ensuring that, as an organization, do people have the webcams? Do people have the microphones? Do the people have the things that they need to be able to be seen and heard in whatever meeting they may have to connect to, right? And it's just such an important thing, because it's basically impossible to participate if you can't be seen and heard, right? With the exception, you can participate in chat, sure, but unless you're paying attention to it, it gets difficult, right? And so I see Elise says seen and or perceivable. Yes, absolutely. So, third recommendation from the science is to foster humor and fun. And now this may seem like I'm going off meeting science script here, or the best practices you might find, having an agenda, starting on time, etc. But the reason I bring this up is because humor fosters social interaction. And one of the things that we kind of lost during the early pandemic, and even as we transition to a more hybrid environment or even a face-to-face environment, we lost some of that social interaction. And that social interaction is very essential for building cohesion and trust in your groups and teams. And if you don't build that cohesion and trust, you don't actually get the best that people can offer, because you're not going to, if you trust someone, you're willing to be vulnerable to them. That means I'll share my crazy idea because I'm willing to be vulnerable to Elise, because I know Elise isn't going to jump down my throat because I threw out an idea that's absolutely absurd, right? Because sometimes those absolutely absurd ideas in our minds are the solution, right? And so humor allows for that to occur, but only a particular type, affiliative humor. Put down humor, self-deprecating humor to some degree can be okay, depending on what how it looks and how it feels. But really, affiliative humor, where it's kind of this shared, more happy form of humor, is the one that really builds that trust and that cohesion. Okay. Fourth recommendation: end well. So actually, that's the fifth one. The fourth one: be a meeting ally. I got a little turnaround. Being a meeting ally. So this is one thing that I heard in one of the sessions earlier today was that oftentimes when you have a hybrid meeting, you end up with a two-tiered situation, right? Where the people in the room are talking to each other, and the people online, maybe they're talking to each other, maybe they're doing chat, but they're not as connected, right? And if you don't do something to ensure that connection, you've created a two-tiered environment where the people that are in the room are getting more of your attention and more of the answers to questions and more of the opportunities even than those who are online, unless you are proactive. And so one way to do that is to be a meeting ally. And by doing that, what you do is you either assign people, or you choose to say, I'm going to be Elise's ally. And so when we're talking, if I'm in the room and I know Elise is online, I'm going to make sure that I call out to Elise and say, hey, Elise, what do you think? Right? So that way she doesn't get lost in the online space, right? Even though we may have people in the room communicating. And so this is the idea that when you create these allies, you create a greater equity environment for the communication when you're collaborating. And then the fifth thing is to end well, right? One of the number one thing that people don't do is when they end their meetings, summarize what actually happened and make sure that the assignments are given out and that people are followed up on those assignments. So basically, we do, even if we have a really good meeting, if we don't ensure that someone actually is tasked with the thing that's been decided, we'll come back to that group again later and be like, oh, what did we decide? Oh, yeah, we decided we should do this. So did anybody do it? And maybe someone was proactive. More than likely, nobody was, right? Because everybody's busy and maybe this wasn't a high priority. So unless it's completely and clearly obvious to everyone who's assigned what, you got to make sure that you end well and follow up and make sure that the different tasks are accomplished. So those are the quick 5 recommendations from science, right? And I actually wanted to go a little short because I know there are questions, right, that have come into chat and also comments that I wanted to address as well. So let's take a look at those. Going up here, humor, okay. Okay, so do people turning off their Zoom screens impede virtual meetings? It depends on the meeting, right? And the purpose of the meeting. So if you're in a meeting that you've decided the purpose is that we're going to collaboratively decide how to solve a major challenge that our organization is facing, and it's a group of 5 to 7 people. And these are people that that maybe haven't worked together a lot, but are now kind of thrown together to help solve this problem. Get the cameras on. Okay. Now, and the reason I say that is because there are several things there that I said that would require more rich communication, right? I said that people don't know each other as as well as maybe a very long-term established group. So there's need to see them so that when they're sarcastic, you understand that they're rolling their eyes as opposed to being serious. You also are talking about a complex challenge. Complex issues require more rich communication to be able to establish and understand what's being said, right? And so there's these are the kinds of factors. And the purpose was to collaborate, right? And if you want to collaborate, you want to be able to see each other so that way that collaboration can flow naturally. However, if your purpose is to give a presentation and then at the end answer questions, you don't have to have everyone doesn't have to stay on camera. You can if you want, but it's not required, right? Because during that presentation, you can still be engaged and still listen and still take notes and so forth with the camera off, and you're not required to then communicate. But at the end, you want to turn on your camera, especially if you want to ask a question or share something, because at that point now you're communicating something that may be complex or may need some face time to be able to communicate effectively. So it's really about what is your purpose and how important is it to you that they understand what you're saying. Good question. Elise, you had your hand up, but then you put it down. So do you still have a question?
I have a question we can handle later. I like Aaron's question in the chat.
Aaron's question. I'm
Says
scrolling.
maybe, oh no, Carrie's, sorry.
Okay.
In thinking of design, basically it boils down to, is a facilitator required? Or in what circumstances might a facilitator not be required?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It depends on the nature of the strategies that are being employed when you're choosing your design, right? If they are completely self-explanatory and you do not need additional context for people to follow the instructions, then you can do a self-organizing approach to facilitating the group, right? You can, they have these things, you print off the form and say, okay, here are the 5 steps, and they're self-explanatory, right? If they're not self-explanatory, or if what you're asking them to do requires additional technological connections and so forth, then a facilitator maybe when necessary. That's one aspect of it. The other thing would be the size of the group, right? As the group gets larger, in order to be able to ensure that that everyone can get into the conversation queue, that everyone can get all their information out there, a facilitator or even kind of a meeting manager type role helps to ensure that the processes happen correctly. So it really kind of depends on what you're trying to do. But I generally, as you get to a larger group like this group, right? We have a tech group helping us out. We have Elise and Dave as facilitators. So there's some facilitation going on here, and part of that's because we have a larger group. Okay. There were some questions about humor. Types of humor. Okay, look like Maha, you put a link there. There are different kinds of humor that we see that we've actually tested. There's some put down humor. There's affiliative humor. There's aggressive humor, that sort of thing. And looking
Joe,
across.
Can you define affiliative humor a little bit more? It's a big word.
Affiliative humor.
That doesn't mean anything to me.
Yeah, that's like things that your group would find funny collaboratively, like things that you've experienced together, not necessarily inside jokes, because that can mean that you're excluding someone, but more like you've all experienced a similar thing and you find it humorous, right? So one of the groups that I've worked with in the past are engineers, and this was engineering teams that had been together for a long time. And they would say things like, remember bolt 27 on machine 33? And then they would start laughing. They're like, oh yeah, they're going crazy laughing at each other because they all knew what they were talking about, right? And they all found it funny. That's affiliative humor, right? Aggressive humor would be, so kind of it's a combination of aggressive humor is more when you're kind of targeting someone, right? And so for that one, it's like, oh, Joe, it's good to see you, Joe. Glad you woke up this morning. It's kind of put down, but it's also more kind of aggressive in the sense that you're belittling someone at the same time as elevating oneself. Okay. And so there's different kinds, and we see, unfortunately, to some degree, we see a lot more aggressive and put down humor in situational comedies that we might watch on television than we see of affiliative humor in those things. And that's partly because affiliative humor often has to have a context of the group or team, right? You've been working together, you've had some common interactions, and now you laugh together. Great questions. Affective labor type of position. This is at Aaron.
I think we have time for one more question. If somebody would like to
question.
come off mute and ask their burning question, this is the moment. It's CJ.
Hi, CJ. Go ahead.
What is the most challenging purpose of a meeting? I.e., what's the biggest pitfall hole I could fall into? So there are easy meetings, which I would argue are the presentation ones where it's passive. Everyone just has to show up, camera off. What's the hardest one that the science says we need to work on? Where can we fail the most?
It's part of the reason why we're doing this, because the hardest meeting is the collaborative decision-making meeting, right? And the reason that is because there's so many different things that people can follow. There's usually not one thing. I mean, there's some extreme examples, but other than the extreme examples, there's not usually one thing that will completely and totally derail a meeting. It's a lot of little things like, oh, we didn't start on time. Well, that means you're probably gonna have more complaining, right? That's what the science says. Oh, well, we didn't have an agenda. Well, that means you're probably gonna have to spend some time talking about what you're doing there, right? And that wastes some time. And then, oh, well, we have a two-tiered situation going on here, and so the people online are not getting into the conversation as much. Okay, so these kinds of things introduce much more challenges in a collaborative decision-making environment than they do in a presentation environment, right? Where those things get resolved much more quickly. Oh, you started a little bit late, but it's very clear what the purpose is because Joe's going to talk for 15 minutes. And we don't have a two-tiered environment because we're going to level that out by having chat going. So you can solve them very, very quickly. Whereas in a collaborative environment where you're expecting interaction, it's just harder. So that's the harder one to do.
Worthy challenge. Thank
Yeah.
you so much, Dr. Allen, for your pearls of wisdom. And I love that humor and play was in the list. That's really exciting to see that that has changed in the last decade. That what used to not be on the list. So hooray for all of us. Thank goodness.